All right, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to our School Safety Community Forum here. I'm Steve Meyer. I'm the superintendent for Clinton Public Schools. I'm joined on stage right now by our Chief of Police, Mark Levinger. And Harold Naughton will be joining us later. I did get a text from his staff that they had an extended session today. So he is in transit from Boston right now. So he'll be here shortly, but we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, so first thing we want to do is just kind of give an overview of what we're trying to do here tonight. We'll talk a little bit about some things that are going on right now and some things that we have planned maybe coming up. And then we want to open up for some questions and answers and suggestions, comments, those types of things. And I think that's really the kind of the big goal of tonight, okay? Because tonight, school safety is a very complex challenge. There's so many facets to it, right? And you're constantly battling. We want to make sure that students can go outside and recess, and students can experience different things, and we want to welcome the community in and volunteers in and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, we face that challenge of trying to make sure that we're keeping all our kids safe and that we're able to take care of that first before we can address anything else. So I think that there's a lot of those challenges, and I think that's why it's important to have a community forum like this, because I think a lot of those decisions and a lot of those directions that we might move to try to take some steps for safety need to be very individualized to the community and the community's needs, because not every community is the same, right? And not every community faces the same risks. So we want to make sure that we are working together so that we can feel that we're taking the steps necessary to keep our students safe. So one thing I talked about at a school committee meeting recently was this plan, and sort of a safety plan of action. And it's not something that really we created. It's more of a way of trying to describe sort of the way we think about school safety. So I started kind of at the top there with the plan, and how that's really how everything starts. We do a lot of planning, a lot of work over the summer, particularly reviewing things. Those plans are designed to help us protect people, make sure that we're keeping students safe. Then we move on to kind of educating our staff, our students about what we need to do. And then that can kind of roll into advocacy, right? What are those things that we need to do to kind of make any other necessary changes, whether that's for whatever it might be for, funding, anything like that. So in terms of planning, Clinton Public Schools has a safety committee. Our safety committee has our school resource officer, Officer Sylvester on it, 2 school committee members, and some other staff as needed. There are nurses, our bus company, fire department. There's a lot of different people who attend, particularly depending on the topic. And we try to review crisis plans and policies and look at issues either as they arise or as we know that there's changes that are coming, things that we need to do to make sure that we're keeping those plans up to date. Our next meeting is March 21st, and I'll get into sort of why we got that next one planned. Our school committee, they vote to approve policies and budget items to support them. So when you're talking about planning, a lot of the plans that we make, really are driven by our school committee. And really, if you think about a budget really is that it's the strongest form of a plan of action we have going forward. So the recent policy revision, we have talked about it at the school committee meetings, and it will be coming up through our policy subcommittee talked about it. It'll be coming at the next school committee meeting on Monday, is a policy related to school searches and potentially the use of dogs to do sniff searches in lockers and cars around the property. So we've had that revised and checked through our attorneys. And the last thing is looking at lessons learned from previous incident and using the form to inform revisions. Another thing that we've done this year is created a social media protocol. And I know there was a incident in December. I know that caused quite a commotion, and a lot of that went out through social media. And we tried to look at that and reflect on that and say, how could we have handled that better? And what are ways we could have tried to respond and communicate to that so that might not have played out the way it played out. So we did kind of create that social media protocol so that we were able to reflect on that. So hopefully moving forward, we can learn a lesson from that. And I think that that's something that we try to do through this planning process all the time, is look at the various incidents that occur and try to figure out what happened there and what could we do differently, or what do we need to adapt in our practices in order to avoid that happening here. So in terms of protection, one of the things that we are focusing on, or moving towards, I should say, would be ALICE training. I'll talk about what ALICE stands for in a second. We did have 3 CPS educators attend an ALICE training on March 7th and 9th. That training was actually discussed and planned for at our last school safety meeting, which was in December. And we have also had security cameras have been installed at Clinton Elementary School this year, which is a part that's going to help us, and we implement more of an ALICE type training, because having that information and being able to see anywhere in the building is critical. With the new security system in the elementary school, through an app, we can view pretty much anywhere in the building. Police still have the same access. We're currently getting all the apps and the remote viewing set up. The goal is to put in a similar system in the middle school and the high school next year in the next budget cycle. So what does ALICE mean? ALICE stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. So you might have heard of lockdown drills, and I know lockdown drills became a big protocol, response protocol. And lockdowns serve a purpose. Typically when you're talking about crisis planning, you have sort of 2 main responses. You either need to, your 2 primary responses are either get out of a building, in which case you're basically doing a fire drill, or stay in the building, in which case you're doing lockdown. So those are your 2 kind of primary initial responses when something happens, right? Those are really our only 2 options, leave or stay. What ALICE does, though, ALICE talks a little more about sort of the next level of that and what you should do once you're in that sort of lockdown situation. Because one of the things that they've learned, one of the lessons I'd say that was learned after the lockdown procedures was that there wasn't really a lot of evidence that lockdowns were actually making anybody safe, okay? Because essentially you're hiding, and that was your primary strategy for defense. But once you were found, or once you were compromised, being sort of huddled in a corner trying to stay quiet really puts you in a vulnerable position. So sometimes lockdown, which I know in Clinton has been referred to as like a code blue, those type of procedures, although there's some use to them, mostly for more of a shelter in place, what we really want to do is start moving towards more of an ALICE attempt, or ALICE protocol. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to think of some different things like counter moves. So that way you have a plan, you're prepared, so that if you are compromised, you know exactly what you're going to do to counter that, to distract the person, distract the individual, and to evacuate. So the idea is, if something were to happen at Clinton Elementary School, and someone walked in up on the 3rd floor, well, we would alert everyone. You could call lockdown. We would inform people using the cameras that there's an intruder or an incident on the 3rd floor, and you should get out. And once you do that, we could get all of our kindergarten students out through their doors that open to the outside and run them over to the fire station. So instead of everyone just sitting, you have a plan so that you're trying to get out instead of just waiting around to see what happens. So I know Mr. Zapantis said he went to the ALICE training. You're one of the people that went to ALICE training this week. Was there anything that capture that okay? Or any big...
It provides a lot more options for students, teachers as well, and it doesn't go in any specific order. Those 5 there, you react to the situation and apply any of those drills there. So it's not, you don't have to first alert, lockdown, inform. They can go in any order. like Superintendent said, you know, if there's something happening on the 3rd floor, 1st floor, there's no reason why they shouldn't be evacuated. So it does fit very well. And if any of you want to look more into it, they give great examples. It's all backed up by a lot of data they've seen from different incidences in the past now.
Thank you. And I know that Officer Sylvester's been trained in that. I don't know if most of you have or not. But I know that that's one of our goals for our next safety meeting that I mentioned, the one that's on the 21st, because we knew that we had the ALICE training in the beginning of March. So our safety meeting, our quarterly safety meeting on March 21st, we will be actually reviewing the Code Blue crisis protocol so that we can look at what ALICE principles or protocols that we might want to try to incorporate into that now. Then what we would do is our plan is to use our April faculty meetings to try to review that revised protocol if there are revisions at this point, and then to do a drill with the revised protocol early in April after that staff meeting. We'll have to see when we review it how much we want to go, how much we're going to be able to implement immediately, because I know that having those security cameras and the ability to inform is really one of those key aspects towards ALICE training, because you want to make sure that you're able to give it accurate information about where a threat might be so that people on the other end of the building are able to respond. So while we're able to start moving really forward with that in the elementary school, we might have to wait a little bit for some of that stuff at the high school and middle school, but I'm sure we can at least start implementing some of those principles. And then I would imagine what we would do is continue, if we can get the cameras put in over the summer, hopefully for these 2 buildings, with more comprehensive training for all of our staff to open the school year next year so that we can implement these principles. You know, how else can we protect our students? So there's some, I'm so torn on this. That's why I say this is one of those complex situations, right? Because on one hand, I'll be the first one to tell you that there's been a school shooting basically every week in 2018. There's been some incident with a gun in a school basically every week. But a lot of the research will say that most of these, the mass shooting events, okay, where you're talking about people losing their lives, are extremely rare events. So a lot of the research says no matter what you come up with to prevent it, the shooter will have a workaround, which doesn't give you a lot of, you know, doesn't make you have a real positive outlook on it. But it's really when you look at those major incidents as you track them back through time. And I think this there's been 16 of them since 1996. And when you look kind of at those data points and you start looking at what are the commonalities, what are the things that worked and didn't work, it's very difficult to identify those because they are all so different. Okay, so there's research that'll say, or there's an analyst that'll say, you know, some people might say, well, we should have metal detectors, we should have security guards, we should have, you know, different things that people will talk about, and hopefully later we can talk about all of that stuff. If you guys want to bring any of those suggestions, and we can talk about it. But some of this research will say that, you know, in 2007, there was an attack in Minnesota where they had security guards and they had metal detectors. Well, the student walked right through the metal detector, set off the metal detector. Security guard came over to see what was going on and just became the first victim. And then the student went on for the rest of the attack. And that was in 2007. There's some other things as far as, there's been pulling of the fire alarms so that attackers were ready to essentially snipe people as they exited a building. There was in 1989, there was an attack at an elementary school playground. There's just a lot of things where it's like, that's why I said it's such a complex situation, I think, because you really need to try to balance that line of, we don't want our children going to school in prisons, but we want them to be safe. So some other things that we need to do, I think, as a school is education. I think that, reporting information, a lot of people say, see something, say something, that type of stuff. And I think you've seen more of that, I think even in the last month, I think we've seen there's been a lot more frequency of, I think, people making copycat type remarks on social media, but also those remarks being reported and being acted on very seriously. I was with a group of superintendents this morning, and we were talking about some of the incidents they've had to deal with in their district about comments in social media and immediately getting law enforcement involved and all that stuff. Other things, just little things, don't open outside doors for others, right? We try to keep the campus locked up, but a lot of times, a lot of times these students are people who, these attackers are people who are familiar to the school, either current students, former students, someone's relative that comes to the school a lot. So just because someone comes to the back door and knocks because it's cold out, doesn't mean you should just let them in. Although I'm grateful to the person that let me in the cafeteria like a half hour when I was coming in. But she could see I had my keys ready. So we did get our Safe and Supportive grant this year, Safe and Supportive Schools grant, and that gives us some grant money that we can use to try to support social-emotional learning. And I think that's another thing where it starts. I know that was part of the response that at the middle school yesterday when we were there were a couple of different, yesterday I know nationally there's a lot of attention on being more like National Walkout Day. That was kind of observed, I'd say, or at least recognized in our middle school and high school. I know our high school students did a real nice job putting together a kind of a remembrance outside, and they were out there in the cold and wind and did a real nice job with that, with some poetry and music and remembering those victims. And when I went over to the middle school took a little bit different approach with the younger audience and really kind of brought them down to the cafeteria there and had more of a discussion about kindness and sort of a kindness challenge and a walk up to kindness and doing random acts of kindness to 14 students and 3 staff members, a way of remembering those victims. So I think that's a key thing is just trying to support social-emotional learning, mental health, those types of things within our school system so that we hopefully aren't creating those feelings of alienation or those feelings that might lead people to become attackers. And we also are building a tiered system of support to address behaviors and behavioral support plans so we can try to track those and use data to try to inform those decisions about how we can support students and what's an appropriate plan to help support them. We're also looking at trying to schedule Rachel's Challenge for Clinton Middle School. That's something that Ms. Sargent and I had talked about. I think you talked with Officer Sylvester about it as well. And this was probably in January or so. But it was Rachel's Challenge. It's named after Columbine, the Columbine shooting victim, Rachel Scott. And her message was start a chain reaction of kindness and compassion. And Rachel's Challenge, I think, it's a really powerful program. When I was the assistant principal in Winchendon, we had Rachel's Challenge come on up there, and they do an assembly for the students. They do an assembly for the parents in the evening, and then there's even sort of this Friends of Rachel kind of club that'll get established. And one of the reasons that it was supported and is usually supported by grants like this is because it's not that like one-shot deal. It's not like we're just going to have okay, we're just going to have a speaker come in and now everything's fixed. It's that speaker to the parents, and then that ongoing club and trying to help change and improve a culture. And the last thing in there is kind of advocacy, right? So that's one of our charges, I think, or our school committee's charge, kind of to advocate for the students in the district, and that's sort of our charge. As an administrator, my charge. One thing we want to do is try to support civic learning to empower students to advocate for themselves. And I think that was part of embracing some of the walkout stuff from yesterday, was trying to work with the students and try to help them. I mean, I know what was done at the high school was all, Mr. Hastings and Ms. Cash sat in with the students a little bit, but really it was student driven, and students came up with it, and it was very, very respectful and very, very focused. But I think trying to help students see that there are things that they can do to help advocate for themselves is important, as well as organizing opportunities to hear from stakeholders regarding changes. And that's part of what this is tonight, right? Trying to have people here so that hopefully when I stop talking, I can hear from you guys and get a little bit of, answer some questions or get some suggestions so that we can look into different things moving forward. So that's pretty much all I have for now for my sort of spiel here. I did, like I said, Representative Naughton should be arriving at some point. When he does, we can let him share what's going on. We do have our Clinton Police Department representatives here, so if you just want to say a few words, Chief.
Sure. Good evening. I'm Chief Lovinger, and with me is Lieutenant Brian Coyne, and our school resource officer had a personal matter that came up. He was supposed to speak here tonight, and unfortunately he can't make it due to a personal matter. But Brian will tell you a little bit about the training that the officers, every officer in the department goes through. And in particular, we train the day shift people that would be responding to calls up here. They get extra training on school response for critical incidents. And the dispatchers are currently enrolled in critical incident response. So there's an awful lot of ongoing training that the police department does. And Paul Sylvester, he is the expert on school safety. And again, unfortunately, he can't make it. But I've been chief a long time, and I've over the years, as these incidents go on, I read up on them a lot. And there's three things in common in all these school shootings. There's that are 100% in every school shooting. And the first thing is the kid really doesn't fit in. He's somewhat of an oddball, or he's been bullied or something like that. And the second thing is that they have access to firearms. And the third thing is they tell somebody about it. It's somebody said, oh yeah, he was talking about that, or he's been on Facebook talking about it, or somebody else knows about it. And it's no surprise. So communication is very, very important. If somebody knows somebody that doesn't belong, doesn't fit in, and he's talking a little crazy, somebody's got to bring it to our attention. Or you talk to your kids and make sure that they ask them what's going on. And if they know something that's going on, have them tell you. But that's where you got to target. And the schools should probably identify the people that aren't fitting in, and making sure that somebody gets involved with them and make sure that they try to make them fit in. Have kids sit down with lunch with them and talk with them and get them to fit in, so they don't feel all alone and get desperate and start thinking crazy things. But I'll let Brian tell you a little bit about the training. I'll open it up to any questions you have. We'll try to answer them as honestly as possible. Myself and Brian have been discussing some programs, possibly getting a full-time school resource officer. Paul's up here quite a bit, and I know that the officers throughout the day drive through the lots here continuously and try to spend some time up here. We talked about maybe having an officer come up here at lunchtime and sit down with the students and have lunch with the students, and maybe the students will get to know the officer. Maybe someone will tell somebody something. And as Steve said, statistically it's a very rare event, but it doesn't make you feel any better when you watch the news and you see something like that. Of course you're concerned, obviously you're concerned, that's why you're here tonight. So I'll let Lieutenant Coyne, he does the scheduling of all the training, so he can tell you about some of the training that the officers go through. And here you go, Brian.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Brian Coyne. Like you said, I'm the lieutenant of the police department. And I apologize, I was late. Officer Sylvester sent me a text at 4 o'clock. He had a personal matter. He's the expert on these issues. He was going to make the presentation up here. I was going to be present, but I didn't expect to be up on the stage, so I apologize. I have jeans on and sneakers, but I'm here. And I work with Paul. I'm Paul's supervisor. And like the chief said, I do the scheduling, and I work with him and try to provide the resources that he needs through working with the school, what he needs for training, what he needs for equipment, what he needs for time to meet with parents and things of that sort. Paul gave me a little thing. I had some previous commitments earlier this evening. I stopped at the station and just printed off some bullet points. And as I walked in, you guys were talking about the ALICE training. Officer Sylvester is ALICE trained, as well as some faculty at each school, I believe. And they're trained not only in the ALICE, but as instructors. And that's something that Paul's been talking with the faculty from all the schools to get the teachers on board and get them training for that. And I think Paul talked about a little bit about what the ALICE program is. Training presents more options for students and staff to survive in an active killer situation in the schools. And as Paul put in his bullet points, members of the CPD and the faculty at all 3 schools in Clinton are now certified as ALICE instructors. And the training they're planning will soon be made available to all the faculty and staff at all the teachers in the school district. Some of the things that we're doing as police officers that we've been doing over the years, we've had active killer drills and training. We use airsoft, like your kids may have, or you've seen. We use airsoft, and we have an opportunity, and the school provides us the time. We're planning on doing it again in April, hopefully, this year. We do it usually on school breaks when there's nobody in school. We try to work with the schools and the janitors and everybody else to have the schools and the facilities to do it. And it's a good program. We use solo engagement tactics where CPD officers are trained in solo engagement. When there's a high level of training, it enables us as a single officer, when we respond, that we immediately go inside and terminate the threat. That's the way we're trained here. I watch the news and what happened in Florida, and I see so many, and not to Monday morning quarterback or sit back, but I don't know what the training they have down there. But if there's an officer outside the school, we're trained to enter the school and end the threat. That's our first. I mean, training as a police officer, morally, as a parent, as a human being, I couldn't sit out there. We're trained to go in and end the threat. That's what we're trained to do. In the past, and Mr. Meyer talked a little bit about these situations adapt, and these people who are involved in it adapt. They adapt to it. It's the same. I equal it to 9/11. Nobody's going to let a plane get hijacked because they're not taking the plane to get hostages freed or to get money or anything else. They're going to crash it into a building. So the tactics changed. The same thing with the police. After Columbine, the tactics changed. We don't stand outside the building, wait for the SWAT team to arrive, because we know what's going on inside the building. So we change our tactics, but unfortunately, these people that are involved in these situations, they watch the news and they change their tactics too. Most of the time, these end with the person taking their own life. And this one that just happened in Florida last week, he didn't. He had an exit plan. A lot of these active killers don't have an exit plan. But they found with the solo engagement, when an officer goes into the building, he starts hollering, yelling, police, this and that. A lot of times it'll end with the killer turning the weapon on himself and committing suicide, or if he does have an exit plan, leaving the building, and hopefully stop any more fatalities at that point. Now, what training they have in other states, this is the way we're trained here at the Clinton Police Department. And as far as I know, these are the best practices that are going on in policing today. Most training that police are receiving in the Commonwealth in this area is the solo engagement. When you get called here, you're the first one here, you get inside that building, you end the threat any way you can. We're also trained in the ALERT, which is Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response, where we are trained to use teams of 3 or 4 people to enter a building, and that's, like I said, when that's available. If I knew there's a cruiser right behind me, we would go in and enter. If I know there's not a cruiser behind me, I'm going to enter on my own. But we are trained to enter as a team too, and there's different levels. The first level is the training focuses on using the 3 or 4 officers to enter. The second level of the training is tactical emergency casualty care. Now, our first a little bit about our training. The first thing that we're looking to do is to stop the threat. Unfortunately, we're trained to go over any casualties or anybody that's in need of any medical attention. The first thing we need to do is stop this person. But we are trained when that situation is stopped. We are trained in officers learn to use tourniquets, clotting bandages to help victims, help people survive at the scene. They used advanced EMS and safely arrive. What we're doing with the training when we do the active killer training too, and we have to expand on it as well, is involve the fire department as well. So we coordinate together. And the dispatch center, which we just expanded. Now the dispatch center, we always had one police dispatcher. Now we have a combination. We have two public safety dispatchers that do police and fire at the station. And when we do the training in April, we're going to include them more in the training. Because we found in these incidents too that the information that you get from the dispatchers is vitally important. They're getting calls from cell phones, people inside the building that see the killer, that see the shooter. They know what floor they're on. They know where they're headed. They know what they're wearing, and getting that information to the officers. And we're going to include that more as part of our training. And as Mr. Meyer said, with the cameras are crucial too. Another fault I seen in Florida was the cameras were on a delay, and they were actually feeding information to the officers at the scene, which was minutes behind. So they were telling the officers the shooter was on the second floor when he was on the second floor 10 minutes ago. So having the cameras in place, I think, are going to be huge for an event like this. The cameras have a lot of good they can do otherwise, but heaven forbid we do get an event like this. They definitely would come in handy with the officers. The cameras you have, they're at some point going to be live in the dispatch center too. We're going to have.
Yeah, so we had Officer Sylvester was at the training when we worked with the company to kind of talk about how we access it and what we can do, and we are able to access it from an app right on your phone or set up on a larger computer screen. And right now we are currently working out it's really like the internet security settings or something to get it out of our server so we can access it remotely. But once that's all done, yeah, we'll set it up. We'll try to set up so it's right in dispatch there, and even, you know, any of you guys that want it would be able to have like the app right on your phone with a Clinton Police login, so you could check.
Yeah. What I think Officer Sylvester does a good job with, we talked about communication, and the chief mentioned communication, and somebody who, in a lot of these shooters, let people know they're going to do it. This kid in Florida, not to go back to the same incident, but the warning signs were there. They were all over the place, and they were missed. But I think Officer Sylvester does a good job. He communicates with me. He communicates with the school that you have an incident with the kid, and it might be the same kid we're having incidents with outside of school. So communicating and putting that information together is vitally important, and try to get this kid the services he needs, or talk to the parents, or get somebody else involved before he gets to that point where it becomes a situation like that. Communication, I mean, there's a whole host of things to get into that we probably don't have time for tonight, but the first thing we got to do is communicate. Any problems, any behavior, like the chief said, if your kids hear somebody saying this, communicate it to a teacher, communicate it to a parent, call us at the police station, and it's vital that we communicate as a police department with the schools, and because there's kids having problems at home, and they're having problems in school, and by communicating, and Officer Sylvester being the liaison between the two, we can kind of figure out and piece together why he's acting this way in school. Well, we're going to his house for certain calls, and he has a certain family situation or a certain situation going on, then we can try to talk to that kid and the parents, and maybe DCF or some other services, get some people involved before it becomes a situation where the kid is so isolated that it becomes a real serious problem like that. But and like the chief said, we talked about our department is really expanding. We have 10 officers. We have 28 officers total. We have 10 of them that have under 5 years on the job. We have 3 that just got out of the academy. And I think our numbers are in a good way right now that we can cover what we need to do and expand some services like a full-time school resource officer. This isn't something that we're just reacting to either. I hate reacting to a situation. This is a terrible situation in Florida and the school shootings throughout. I can think of 100 different reasons why a full-time school resource officer. I've been a lieutenant for over 3 years now. It's been something I've been talking about and thinking about since I've got this position. I think that having the officer in the school. We used to have a program when I first got on the job, Cops and Kids, and we did a lot of good, I think. And we made a lot of relationships. I see kids now that they're in their late 20s, 30s now that I had in Cops and Kids, and they come up to me. And I think that was a great program. There's a lot of federal grant money at the time to do those things. We played basketball with the kids outside. We took them on some trips. We used to have a van, a big old van that had McGruff the crime dog on it. And we used to do certain things with the kids and take them to places. But we really formed a lot of relationships with kids growing up in the community at that time. And it was a lot of different officers involved in it. But I think a full-time school resource officer would do a lot of that. And I think Paul does a lot of good things now, and he is part-time, and he works with the school, and he's certainly part-time beyond the hours he works. He gets calls from officers at 5, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning about somebody that they're dealing with that's school age. Does he know them? They haven't come home. Does he know who their friends are? And sometimes he makes some phone calls to some of the faculty here, and he says, this kid hasn't come home. Do you know who his friends are, where we should be looking for him, who we should be calling? So relationships like that are vital to stop incidences like this, communicating as a community, as a school department, the police department, and everybody on the same page and having the same knowledge, and I think is the best way. There's a lot of other things to get into, but that's where we're at. We have had training over the last few years, and like I said, we've changed different schools. We've used the active killer training the solo engagement, the alert, and the Alice training is something. We've done the Code Blues, working with the schools, doing those, and the kids. I've done a couple of those in my days, and it's sad. It's sad when you walk through the hallways and the kids are, and you see a little head pop up above a desk. But that's a world we live in, unfortunately. But we have been doing that, and we're going to continue to do that. And hopefully, with the full-time school resource officer, I can help provide him the resources, and he can work even more diligently and have even more hours to spend to get some of these things together and get some more programs going.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I did all right. I didn't plan any of that. But Officer Sylvester does a great job. I wish he was here, and certainly as parents, if you want to contact him, talk to the school, call the police station, he'd elaborate more on this. He'd go into a lot more detail about the training and about what it actually entails. And I know he goes to the training, and we get him all the resources that he needs to do it, but he could definitely, and he would be more than happy to sit down with the parent or anybody in the community, explain exactly what we do and get more detail about it. Thank you.
I think that's great. You talked about the school resource officer, and we have had some discussions about that at the school committee level, and some discussions with the get preliminary discussions with the chief and the town administrator to talk about sort of what that might look like and how we might be able to pull something like that off. I know that in the previous districts I've worked at, we've been lucky enough to have a school resource officer, and I felt that it was definitely a valuable piece to that whole picture of a safe and secure environment. So hopefully that's something we'll be able to work towards. So as you can see, we were just joined on stage by our representative, Harold Naughton. Harold has been, he's a Clinton alum. He's been in our House Rep since 1995. He also serves as the chairman of the Joint Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security. So I knew when we wanted to schedule this for him, I reached out to him to see if he could come out and help and share a little bit of what's going on at the state level. And I know a lot was going on. It kept you late today.
It was a late day today, and I apologize for my lateness. And of course, the later you get in the afternoon, the more you're going to have to deal with the Mass Turnpike, which is never fun. Great to join Brian, the chief, the superintendent. Wore my green and gold tie, just class of '78. Steve Mendoza and I. Unfortunately, I'll tell when you think back about. We went to the high school where the elementary school is now, and time goes by so quickly, and I've spent so much time in the house that I hired a young woman in our office coming up on, Sue, 2 years ago now? Alyssa Ring from Clinton, another graduate of Clinton High School, and as part of her interview process, she said to me, "Do you realize you've been the state rep longer than I've been alive?" It doesn't necessarily make it feel too good. But by the same token, to be able to come out tonight to meet with my fellow townspeople and hopefully give some idea of what we're doing on the state level to make you feel a little bit more comfortable that these issues are on our radar screen, it means a lot. It's an important part of the job. The reasons that bring us here tonight are unfortunate, as Brian said. But the fact that we've got a school department, a superintendent, a principal, school committee members that are proactive on this is very important. As I said at a couple of the schools I spoke at yesterday around my district, the primary points of my job is to make sure that the kids come to school every day and they're worried about learning, probably worried about their social lives, worried about their, the typical things that we were worried about. Are you popular or not, I suppose. But now they've got to worry about, are they safe? Are their friends safe? Are their siblings safe? What we're doing on the state level, and the last time we were forced to re-examine this after Newtown was in 2014, when the Commonwealth did what we like to consider, we don't just consider, it's been recognized as a groundbreaking and nation-leading piece of gun safety and school safety legislation, that many elements of which have led this Commonwealth to have the lowest gun death rate in the country, and we're incredibly proud of that. And we did that at the same time while trying to balance public safety with the interest of constitutional rights. There is even in this state, there's a strong interest in firearm owners who are respectful, who are law-abiding, who are participate in shooting sports, hunting, and outdoorsman-like activities that are concerned about their rights being respected. So it's always balancing that. And I mention that because there's another element here that we're trying to balance right now too. But as part of that legislation, we did set up the Safe and Supportive Schools Act, which it was passed in 2014, came into effect in 2015, which required the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to start tracking best practices in school safety and set up programs by which they were able to share information between school districts, between police departments, law enforcement, and public safety agencies as to what are the best practices, what's working, what could work better. And that's a constant program that the Commonwealth is going through and sharing with our school departments. In the previous administration, in the Patrick administration, there was a grant program by which school departments could apply for funds for funding of school resource officers and other protective measures for school buildings and school departments. It hasn't been reinvigorated. It hasn't been reinstituted over the past couple of years. As we head into, in about a month, the House will be debating its version of the fiscal year 2019 budget. I think you'll probably be seeing some more looks at a program like that. We all know that even with local aid, school budgets are stretched incredibly thin. Police budgets are incredibly thin. And so the Commonwealth will be looking for efforts to see what we can do to be helpful, to step up, and not just do it on a grant basis or a 1 or 2 year basis, but long term to allow school departments to plan for the safety of the children. I mentioned the balance of public safety with personal rights because there's been a lot of discussion, especially since the event in Florida, and red flags that were raised on that individual on his mental health issues. We've also seen it in the Commonwealth recently with the stabbing death of the young woman in, I think it was Wellesley or Stoughton, in the library, just there studying on a Saturday morning. In 2014, and I am pretty experienced with this legislation that we passed in 2014 because it came through the committee that I chair, the Public Safety Committee. And we made some strong efforts to address issues of mental health. But it's difficult because you ask 10 people what their definition of mental health is, and you're going to get 10 different answers. And there's a very strong, there are very strong advocacy groups for people with mental health issues. National Association, NAMI, National Association of Mental Illness being one of them, who have a very, very strong footprint at the State House, and they do great work for the people that they represent. So right now, there are two different pieces of legislation percolating through the legislature that would allow law enforcement, police, obviously, the courts, family members, or other loved ones to go to a court and ask a judge to issue an order taking firearms away from someone that they're afraid may be a danger to themselves or someone else. The problem with that becomes, where's the due process? Where's the, what evidentiary standard should be used to show that that person is that danger? If they say, hey, I'm not a danger, that's the way I act. And so so again, we're trying to balance public safety with personal and constitutional rights. It's never easy, but there's been a lot of discussion of that over the past few weeks, and it will go through the rest of this legislative year, I'm sure. So that's what's kind of at the top of the ticker right now as far as new legislation affecting public safety, gun safety, and school safety. So I'm happy to be here. I hope that at least answered some preliminary questions, and I'm happy to take any questions in this format tonight.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for your remarks. I think at this point, we'd like to open it up if anyone has specific questions for any of us, or suggestions, or comments. I think Mr. Hastings, if you want, I know Mr. Hastings has a wireless mic he can bring around. So if you'd like to ask anything, just you can raise your hand. He'll come get you.
So what I'm hearing is these shooters like to go to soft targets, and the schools are considered soft targets because they're filled with children. So why wouldn't we, and I don't care if I had to volunteer 2 hours out of the whole school week, but why can't we just not flood the front of the school, but make it so it doesn't look soft? Like even if there was 2 cruisers parked there with no cops in them, but there's 1 cop in the building. Things like this, let's say someone comes to the school and they want to buzz in, well, they can get in there first, but then an escort has to come get them to bring them to where they want to go. That's one thing. And another thing is they can just reach in, pull the fire alarm, and everybody comes out. Well, how many children have probably had to pull a fire alarm? Probably not many. And if anything serious going on, a teacher would know about it. So why wouldn't there be a keypad on the fire alarm? It's very easy, like 3, 2, 1, whatever. So nobody can just do that, but yet it's easy enough to do. And then I can go on and on. Because I'm a builder, why can't we I could make something that you go under that stage right there, it's all metal encased, nothing could happen to you. Do all the doors lock automatically with the press of a button from the receptionist's desk? Is that what you mean by lockdown? And things like this. Hopefully you can answer some of those questions.
I guess so. Right now, no, none of our doors are to the point where they can be secured from one location point. I know those kind of doors you're talking about. We don't have those in any of our buildings at this time. I do think, part of the idea of making it less of a soft target, kind of to use the term you used. I think that's sort of, I guess, what we're trying to talk about when we talk about the school resource officer, trying to have more of a presence here all the time. I think right now we get, like we said, we have a great relationship with Officer Sylvester. He's up here a lot, but he's got other responsibilities. And I think that in a situation where we have a dedicated school resource officer, the students know, the community knows that person is going to be in the schools all the time. And I do think it does help serve sort of as that deterrent, because you're right. Even if the SRO is not in the cruiser's out front, right? and then he might be walking around the building, or she might be walking around the building. So I think there are things like that. The fire alarm thing, I think we'd have to talk to the fire chief about that, because they. Yeah.
How many kids have a full fire?
Yep. Yeah. So I think those are all good things. I made some notes here so we can talk about.
Yeah, I think, just to answer that a little bit, I think. Yeah, I think environmental design, there's a lot of things that can be looked at like that. I'm not sure about fire alarms or anything like that. But I think Mr. Meyer talked about metal detectors, where if somebody has the will to run through a metal detector isn't going to stop them. I mean, there's been incidents in school. There's been an incident in the nation's capital where they ran through the metal detector and started shooting people. But I think there's a lot of things that they can do with environmental design and letting teachers know different ways. I think teachers have a different mentality too in the school, unfortunately, with all the events that are going on. So that's definitely something the school could look at.
So I like the idea of this Alice training. It sounds really intriguing, and it makes a lot of sense with, having all of these children gathering up in corners and an active shooter coming in, they're an easy target. My question is that there's only been a code blue practiced in the elementary school last year, and it's been 7 months since the beginning of the school year. And I understand that things change over time and the procedures need to change, but why haven't the kids been practicing this consistently, like fire drills or things like that?
Yep.
Because my kids are young, and I know that my youngest doesn't have the best memory in the world, so he doesn't remember the code blue last year.
Yeah.
So I feel like, why aren't we consistently practicing this?
I think that's I think it's a good point. I think that's something that we're going to want to look into as we continue to revise this, and making sure that we have a clear training schedule that we want to follow, similar to fire drills. I mean, fire drills by the statute, I believe we have to do them quarterly. I know we have to do them quarterly, but I think it's written into actual law. But I think the point is well taken. That typically, we should probably start something much like fire drills, do something early in the year, because you might have kids who are new to that building, and they should want to get brought up to that, or new staff, anything like that. So I think that point has merit. I do think the only thing we need to balance it with a little bit is that they do say that because there is sort of that lack of evidence that really that's doing too much, that it's because there's that lack of evidence that it's actually that productive, that we want to balance that with we don't want to over-traumatize and make them think that everything is always something bad coming to happen, especially with our younger kids. So I think it's I'd agree. I think probably we should be looking at them, maybe twice a year, once early in the beginning of the year, maybe a reminder, sometime after Christmas and towards the spring, that kind of thing. So that point is well taken.
I don't mean to have a list, but I do have a few questions. What is the barriers for, or is there a barrier for a full-time SRO or the cameras in the middle school and the high school? Is that just a budgetary concern, or are we pretty confident that that's going to happen in the next budgetary cycle? Or what's something that we can do as a community to make sure that happens? Because that should be a priority in terms of safety for our kids and for the police department, to be sure that they can get what they need for safety for the kids as well.
I definitely think budget is one of the things. I do know that I think right now our security camera proposals will probably be presented under a warrant article this year at the town meeting, with a couple other safety upgrades, including a fire panel and some things that need to be upgraded. So as of right now, that's where they're being proposed. I mean, where it's going to land as we go through the budget process, we'll have
that part
to see.
we can help out with.
That part you can help with, yeah.
I'm just saying,
and
when
the
it
school,
comes to,
sorry, go ahead.
but when it comes to, making sure that, I don't know if it's a partnership between the police department and the school department with the SRO,
Yeah.
but if that's something that you need, if we think one full-time is sufficient, or if it's something you need a full and a half, or, because I know the middle school and the high school are similar together, but do you need another part-time resource for the elementary school, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think that's something that, I think we need to start looking into. I think there's some different arrangements for school resource officers in terms of sort of memorandums of understanding as far as what they have access to, what the role entails, those types of things. So it takes a little bit of working out, but I don't think it would be overly cumbersome. I think it's the type of thing that if we had a couple meetings, and particularly with like the finance committee and stuff as we're coming up on town meeting, I think that would be something we'd be able to hopefully move forward with.
And I
We'll
don't mean to
see.
have a list, but I do have a second question. I do
Yeah.
have another question. But the Alice training, so I'm completely on board with Alice training, completely on board with the whole cameras and everything. How do you train the children to respond for Alice training? I would understand they'd listen to their teachers and whoever is leading that, but how would you get them prepared for that? Would that be something that the school department would, in conjunction with the police department, would ready the students for, similarly to how they do for fire alarm, fire drills? And what would be the plan for something like that?
So I wasn't at the actual training. I don't know if we want to defer to someone who was trained there.
So my name's Paul Zapanis. I was fortunate enough to go to the training, and to answer that question, there are age-appropriate, almost curriculum, if you will, of books, kind of stranger danger books that prepare elementary age kids for all the Alice procedures. Mrs. Sargent was there as well. Do you remember the name of the book that they were showing us for the kids? But it's out there. There are resources that are going to prepare these younger kids for it as well. And I just want to make the point to commend, and let everyone know how fortunate we are as a community to have our school department and our police department on the same page. At the training, we were there with other chiefs of police who had to go back the next week and try convincing their superintendent to take on Alice. While we have a superintendent here, who sent his staff and is on board with the police for this type of training. So we are very fortunate. Bringing up what Representative Naughton mentioned, 2014 Mass Task Force on School Safety and Security recommended all of these Alice principles. So, with the latest research, this is what is coming and what we should be doing. And it's sad that there is so many, shootings. To look at the statistics now that, lockdown, the traditional lockdown procedure, which is different from the Alice lockdown, wasn't the best procedure to be in place. So now, we are being proactive and implementing something new such as Alice.
What is lockdown? Can you describe that briefly?
Yeah, so a lockdown would be, if you're up, so for example, Columbine and Virginia Tech were two examples they gave us. And in Columbine, they went into the traditional lockdown of lock your classroom door, shut the lights off, hide under your desk. Those kids in the library, where a lot of the deaths occurred, had access to an outside door. And instead of evacuating, they did what they were trained to do. They were trained to hide under their desks. So now Alice is providing us with more opportunities, to be able to evacuate, and you would have prevented a lot of those deaths there. Virginia Tech, if you look at classroom by classroom down that hallway, the rooms that, barricaded the door, jumped out the windows, second floor, lowered themselves down, okay? A lot fewer deaths than the ones who, hid under the desks, traditionally,
Lockdown isn't necessarily a good thing.
as they were trained.
Yeah,
So there's a difference between the lockdown here and the lockdown of the traditional lockdown, okay, where you hide under the desk. Alice isn't saying to do that. The lockdown they're talking about is barricading doors, using your belt to tie the door openers, different things like that. So if an intruder, it's stopping an intruder from coming into the room. And then also part of the C in Alice, the counter. You're ready if that intruder comes into the room to throw objects at them, to swarm them and take them down. What was that? Break the OODA loop. I don't know if there's any, military or police, if you've heard the OODA loop processing. Every time something's thrown at you, it's going to throw off your processing, 0.3 seconds. But in that time, it's enough to, take down that intruder and help them in that sense.
So I think, the traditional lockdown, how it's used a lot, it's almost like the strategy was to hide. So you tried to like lock your door in your classroom, turn the lights off, almost hide under a desk or in a back corner, and really the strategy was hope the person walks by your classroom, right? Hope the person thinks there's nobody in there and walks by. And that was sort of the response that became the standard, I'd say, probably shortly after Columbine, right around there in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And you know, it's some sort of response, but the problem was once you were compromised, right? Once someone said, well, I know there's a class in there, and they broke a window or something and got in there, then now you just had a sitting target. So that's where Alice is really saying, you know, don't just try to hide, actually barricade yourself, actually have a counter plan, and if you can get out, get out.
And to answer Jen's question, here's the book here Mrs. Sargent found. I'm not scared, I'm prepared. And it's because I now know all about Alice. So this is things that, you know, elementary school teachers, and they're not expensive resources, you know, maybe $10 books that they can prepare their classes with. And because of that, you know, they're not scared, they're prepared for any of those situations. So, yep.
I just want to address, too, please, your first question about, and it is about budgeting and manpower. And in the police department, like I said before, we have a lot of guys under 5 years, and I think for the first time in half the time I've been at the police department, we're in a position where we do have the manpower to address this with the full-time officer. We had the 3 guys get out of the academy, and then they did some field training. They just got on the road on their own about the end of the year. And at that time, me and the chief had discussions with the supervisors at the station, and we also wanted to address another problem. We took a sergeant off a patrol function, and we put him in the drug detective unit full-time because of the opiate epidemic and the drug problem throughout the Commonwealth, throughout the country. So we wanted to address that issue with him. We also took a sergeant off 2 of his patrol shifts to address firearm issues in training with the police department. He's also a trainer. He's one of the main trainers for the active killer. We want him to spend more time to plan that, to plan the firearms training with the officers. De-escalation is a big issue. You know, it's kind of dying down, but over the last couple of years there's been a lot of issues with police-involved shootings, and we want an officer to spend a lot of time and commit himself and our resources to that, to get the police officers in town the best training that we could with our firearms, which includes the active trainer drills and everything else. So we're trying to do things now that we do have the manpower, not to make any excuses, because this is a priority and a school resource officer. And it almost sometimes it's working so well with Paul. He does such a good job and he has such a good relationship that part-time is working. But I think it could, and I think you guys will all agree that it could work even better with the full-time guy if he had more time to commit to the schools. So it definitely is something we're looking at, and we're, I think, in a position now that we haven't been in the last 10 years, that we do have the manpower and the resources to commit them. And we're using the resources we have the best to address a number of issues in the community.
I've got a question. Can you walk me through what is the protocol from information obtained to how it's processed and finally wrote off as either a potential threat or one that we're just going to file away?
In terms of in general, like if something is reported?
Receive a call stating that so-and-so has been, reported on Instagram, X, Y, and Z. How is that information handled from being obtained? What is like the chain of command from, the information comes to a secretary? What's the process and how it finally gets, processed through and decided that, okay, this isn't a threat that we need to think about?
Yep. So typically, I think anything that comes forward, particularly from a student, is going to get channeled up through the administration in the building. So typically, it would end up going to either the assistant principal or the principal. And if it went to the assistant principal, ultimately, it would go to the principal. Usually at that point, I would probably be notified by the principal, letting me know that there was whatever the situation was, and I usually would probably have the principal contact Officer Sylvester directly, so that way they could share that information. And from that point, a lot of times, from our standpoint as a school, sort of once we hand it over for the investigation, at that point, we basically turn it over to the police. So they might come in and interview, the school resource officer might come in and interview other students, or make a home visit or whatever the police determine the next step in the investigation would be. I don't know if you.
Yeah, it's definitely, every situation is different. We'd have a background on the individual who the report was made on. We'd see how credible it was, and Paul would definitely follow up with the detectives and with other officers. He's had home visits, had parents come in. We'd alert other agencies, Department of Children and Families. We look at the history, involve the school, what's the behavioral issues or anything in school, any red flags, anything, any concerns there, and address it there. It could even, some of these threats rise to the level of criminal charges. So and some of them don't because they're third-hand knowledge, but every threat that's brought before the school and brought to the police is definitely taken at a high threshold until we know it's not. But it's a case-by-case basis, and they're followed up with the families. First thing we do is make sure they don't have access. We had a call recently that they went into the house, searched the house, and made sure that there is no access to firearms, which is one of the big things. That if there was a claim made or a threat made with that, we have voluntary search. If they didn't volunteer, then other steps would have been taken where they would have had to try to get a search warrant to search the premises. But they would take it seriously and make sure that those threats weren't valid. But Officer Sylvester and the police department have involved a number of different resources, mental health counseling. We've brought kids or people up to the hospital that are making threats like this to be evaluated, and juvenile probation is involved with it, involved the juvenile court and different things.
One thing we would recommend is if you see something on social media in particular, please try to take like a screenshot of it, because I know, as I mentioned, when we start hearing things third and fourth and fifth hand, and now it's someone's reported this to somebody, it makes it much more difficult to kind of track it all back through. But if we have sort of that original kind of post, and now we kind of have an original screen name and those types of things that we can try to go back, because a lot of times by the time it comes to us and we start investigating, that original post or whatever was originally made is long deleted.
I'd say,
I'm just going to follow up by asking, is every particular situation, are the parents brought in right away with that complaint, or are there situations where it's not even brought to the parents' attention?
I mean, I think if anything was thought of as anything credible, like a threat, the parents would be notified.
Yeah, I can't speak that it's 100%. I would say, yeah, I would answer that, yes. The parents are definitely involved, and that's the first line to see what's going on in the home and to notify them of these threats and what's going on with the situation. And I think how the officers respond is a lot of how the parents respond. You know, if they don't think it's a big deal, then, well, maybe they're not going to handle it at home. Maybe we need to do more to make sure this kid's getting the resources he's getting. Because you don't always get the response from parents that you would expect when you go and you say any type of involvement with the police. Unfortunately, sometimes you don't get and sometimes you do. You get very supportive parents who didn't know this was going on, and you check in with them and make sure that they're following up and doing what they need to do for their child, that these threats aren't credible and aren't going to continue on.
And also, in what situation is the school community brought to all of our attention about something instead of just like to the parents? What warrants everybody knowing some information?
I think if there was any thought that there was a threat to other students, then I think at that point we certainly would communicate that to the entire school population.
And this may seem, I don't mean to seem like kind of attack. Who makes that decision that that piece of information is enough to tell everyone, and when is it not? You know, I mean, that's a real fine line.
Yeah.
Because I may think something like that is really important, and maybe somebody else doesn't believe it is. I mean, there must be a protocol in terms of like, all right, we have to tell everybody this, but we don't necessarily need to broadcast every situation that, maybe I don't want to say not as credible or threatening.
And how do you tell us?
Well, I mean, I think we would tell if we had an issue that obviously we thought was a risk to everyone. If there was a potential threat that we had any reason to believe was credible, we would use all forms we could. So we would do the one call or the Connect Ed phone call, post to the website, social media. those types of things. So I think once we felt we had something that we needed to share, because it was definitely, there was something that we thought could impact student safety, we would use all forms to communicate that information. And honestly, if there was something that we thought was that credible of a threat, that there was that larger concern, there's a good chance we might cancel school. We might do different things. We might have a delay until the building can be checked out. We might, so there's a lot of things like that that would go into place if there was a concern that we thought rose to that level. I mean, in terms of, I understand your question in terms of like, well, where is that level, right? And I think that that's the challenging part of the whole situation, is that every one of these things is different, and every one of them you're looking and saying, what's the context something was said? Did we actually hear the person say it? Did the person actually post it? Was this a game of telephone? And now we're talking, someone reported they thought they heard this, and really when we traced it back, we know this is what was actually said. And then I think that can create some of those fears, I think, that sometimes cause us those situations. So, I think given everything, and like I said, I know we reflected on the incident in December. I think that I know personally I need to do a better job of trying to communicate some of that, especially once I know something is something that if there is some sort of rumor about something or people know about something, we need to try to clarify that if we know something to be opposite of that. So. I think that's something that we've tried to reflect on, but I think to the lieutenant's point here, that we're going to try to take everything as we're going to treat everything as credible until we have someone, typically the police, telling us it's not.
I think and whether or not these guys would say it, the support that you can give, there's a situation, I want to stress this is not in the Clinton School Department right now, but there's a recent situation in another district, and this takes into account how families have changed, and it was brought to my attention by another member of the House who lives some distance from here. It was a constituent of hers. One parent lives, let's just say this about 40 miles from here. One parent lives in her district. The two children live in this district, not in this town. I'm stressing it's not in Clinton. One goes to school in the district, one goes to school in an abutting district. So now you're dealing with two school districts and two parents at distance, a significant distance apart. The parent who's not the custodial parent notices something on social media of one of the children getting bullied, mentions it to the custodial parent who kind of minimized it, and then the second child who's going to school in the abutting district through school choice says, no, I had those same problems with this guy when I was there. That's why I left the school. And then they dig down into it and find that, yeah, there actually is a threat here. So I know it's kind of an attenuated story, but it was through having to do a little further digging into social media that they actually found there was an issue here, to the point where they brought Julie, what's her name, at the DA's office. They brought the district attorney's office into it anyways, Julie Lashwa, whatever, who deals with the school. So it's just, but it was like putting a puzzle piece together, because they checked Snapchat, they checked Facebook, and they had to, it took some effort, but if it hadn't been for the non-custodial parent living 40 miles away from here who kind of was a little pushy about it, they wouldn't have found the threat. Yes.
I'm here, I just have a question. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a couple things, comments. I'm a parent of an 8th grader. I applaud the schools in, informing us of things that are happening, but I do want to say as a parent that I do feel it's important to communicate things that are happening a little bit better in the schools. I find that I see the notices that come home from the Clinton Middle School site. Mrs. Sargent calls my house every Sunday night about 6:30, and it's great. As a parent this week, it was of a middle schooler, and also being a middle school teacher, it was difficult to have a conversation with my child about what was happening yesterday in the school, because I said to him, are you participating in a walkout? Is something happening? And having that conversation, he wasn't sure what was going to be happening in the school. If I missed the communication, I apologize. But I felt as a parent with the safety forum coming up, I wanted to have a good discussion with my child, and I felt like I lost that with my son. And he came home yesterday, and he was so, just relieved what the day was like for him yesterday. And he said that it was a really nice ceremony, but I think that communication for those events could happen ahead of time, and I apologize if I missed that, but as a parent, it would have helped having a difficult conversation with a 13-year-old.
Yep.
Also, my son's been in the middle school now, 4th through 8th grade. I would like my child to know what to do in the event of an emergency, and I am well aware of Alice training, but I hope that instead of talking and talking and talking about what we're going to do, how we're going to train them, that we actually look at how we're going to train the children. It's the world that they live in. They see it on the news, they see it on social media. I would like my child to come to school and say, hey, Mom, I know what to do if there's ever something that happens. I just find that it's important. I don't want to wait, 2 years down the road saying, hey, we're going to have Alice training. I want it to happen, and I know that it can't happen fast because there are logistics that are involved. But I just, I want my child to know what to do. It's been a long time that he's been in the middle school, and as a parent, it's difficult to have that conversation because he's not aware of what to do.
So thank you for the comments, and just two things. I think as far as communicating about what the plan for yesterday, I know that part of that is our fault. I don't think you missed a communication.
I'm not placing the blame on you. I thought that you did a really nice job.
Yeah.
I saw it on Facebook after. I would have liked to have known what was happening ahead
Yeah.
of time because it ties into the community safety forum. Having that conversation with my 13-year-old about why this was happening is because of the school shooting. And I just would have liked that in
Yep.
advance.
And I guess the only part I'd say is I think that our program for the middle school kind of came together much later than the elementary school, or the high school, because we really weren't necessarily sure if it was going to permeate down to that level. And I think as we got closer to the day, that's when we started hearing some concerns from sort of even our 8th grade teachers saying, hey, the students are starting to talk about this, what's the plan? And then, yeah.
What my son said. He said, well, my friends are going to do a walk, I think, a walkout, so I'm
Yeah.
going to do it. And I tried to have that conversation. Well, that's not why.
Yeah.
But
So I think, I agree, that could have probably been better. I won't blame the snowstorm, but remember, we lost a day in there too. The other part was, how to train the students. I do want to make sure that we, I do think that's something that we will try to implement as quickly as we can. I think, I've been in the district less than a year. I think we've been working on trying to get our safety committee up, trying to bring the Alice training forward. We've got our trainers trained. I think that really you should see us. I would hope that we have the security camera systems, and we have everyone Alice trained for the beginning of next year. And I know that might seem like it's a long way away, but it's really not. I think it's going to fly by. But even now, if there's steps that we can start to implement and train, I think that'll be our goal, to try to see if we can implement some stages of that even as soon as April. Yes.
I wanted to apologize. No, there's no apology. That's not what I'm saying. I know, but I was at the Alice training last week.
Okay.
In the middle was the snowstorm. I got a text message from my 8th grade teachers on Friday. Could we do something? Met with them Monday. Was going to get the Connect Ed out on Tuesday. No school. But I didn't want to drop.
no, there's no blame. I don't want it. I would like, just think about it for the future. Just
Yep.
put it in your pocket
I
and say,
agree
you know
with
what,
you.
next time we do something, just maybe a little blurb, because as a parent, I wasn't sure really how to have that conversation with my son, and it would have been important, because I do think it ties into this.
Yeah, because if you and I think you're right, and I think giving parents that opportunity to have that conversation is important.
I talk out loud again? You know, all the stuff you say about the problem of this whole matter is walking through the front door of these schools or the side door. So when you have these cameras, someone watching them, like if somebody's just walking up to the door, does somebody see him with that camera? And why isn't the problem just stopped there? The problem can't be stopped on Facebook. In Florida, somebody walked into the FBI and said, hey, this guy's gonna do this. Somebody sent the FBI letter and they did nothing. That kid still did it. So the problem is at the front door, the side door, coming in the parking lot. Why? Because that seems like something that can be fixed.
Yeah, so typically that's what will end up happening is, I mean, we're still working on implementing the software and the monitor system at the elementary school because they were just installed. They're just installation finished, I think, in February. But typically, like in the schools I've worked in the past, that's exactly what we've had. We've had a monitor right in the main office that would show, you could pick like the 8 cameras you wanted to watch on that monitor at all times. Usually those were exterior cameras that you would watch from there. And then usually you might have a second command center set up within the building that's not in the front office where you could access all the monitors as well. So that if you needed to kind of, have a command that was in a secondary location, you could still access. Yeah, and they're locked all the time at, they're locked, all the exterior doors are locked all the time. But yeah, I know what you're saying. So, or at least we can, yeah, so it does, and it does help. I mean, you notice, I know in some of the, certain schools, different things as far, someone might be just, walking their dog and they happen to walk around the school. Well, when you have the cameras, you notice it and someone says, what's that guy doing? And at least then someone goes out and says, can I help you? And I think that just those types of little things, you're right, that it kind of helps cut down some of the yeah.
Everybody here is here because of this, right?
Right.
So we care.
Yep.
I'll go tomorrow and I'll man the door. Just, hi, can I help you? What do you need? Do you have an appointment? Who are you here to see, Mr. Rulo?
Well, they are.
Scared. Whatever. And then if it's not, you know what I mean? Then that would keep people away. Once you know that's happening.
I mean, all the doors are locked, and we do have the buzzer system at every school system, so at every door. So for you to get in, you have to buzz. There is a camera the secretaries can see. If they can't see through the camera, because sometimes where the person's standing, they're able to move and make a visual confirmation through the window, and then they would buzz you in. So to get into the school, they're supposed to be that, as long as no one else just pops the door for you, you should really only be able to get into those. There's one door in each building that has the buzzer system. That's the only door that people should be getting in and out just during the day.
I see that we're 100 feet away.
Yeah.
150 away.
Yeah.
A guy in a booth,
Yeah.
Pick up lumber and I can't have the receipt. Okay, go ahead, Ray. Going to school, you should have to have that too. Drive by a gate, somebody's at the gate. Hi, what are you doing here today?
Yeah.
Late on this recorder or whatever. Keep them away from the school. My wife is really upset because she's not from here. She's legal, but all the schools are built back here, like back. You see the car coming, you see anybody coming, there's protections in front of the schools. It's not just like out near the road and anybody can just walk in.
Yeah.
That foot traffic has to stop, I think. I'm ready to go. What do you want me to do? I'm ready to go. You mean something? I'm at the door. I get completely fished when I go on my shift. 5 of us, 10 of us. And here we are. We have red flags on, whatever we have. Clown suits. We're passing out candy to the kids so they're not all upset, but that's what has to happen. Hands on. We're not soft. We're here. You're not coming in here unless you have school business. That's it. Not running through the metal detector, because guess who's going to stop you? Me, and I'll take one for the team. But that's what has to happen.
We do have volunteer crossing guard at the elementary school if you want to help out there and watch as people are coming and going in the morning.
I think Mr. Meyer touched on it before. There's a fine line between do you want a prison system or do you want a school system? I think there's a lot of things. There's a lot of vendors out there. There's a lot of, I know there's a school, Montana or something, the most secure school in the country, and if something comes in that it shoots smoke down and flashing lights, and just to distract the active shooter. There's different things, and I can see that coming down the line to all school systems, especially new schools that are being built. They're going to come with this stuff already built in because they're going to think of it ahead of time. And I can see the school seeing, there's vendors calling me, and I read police magazines, and there's things out there for environmental design and to change and to harden the target a little bit. But does that mean there should be an armed guard with an M16 at the door of every school? You know, that's but yeah, but that's the fine line. That's the fine line that you want an educational institution too. You don't want it, and that's what Mr. Meyer touched on with too many of the code blues, with putting kids, stuffing them under their chairs all the time in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, to the point where they're coming home thinking the boogeyman's coming to the school next week, you know? No, I know what you're saying, but I'm just saying there's a fine line in between hardening it and making it, you know, you still want it in a school environment. And there's a lot of things that are going to be coming out, you know, unfortunately, that technology meets the need, and there's a need, and they'll find things to bulletproof glass or whatever they're going to find, doors, locked doors with the switch or whatever, and they're out there, and I'm sure Mr. Meyer will be looking at that.
I think we had another question there.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. My question is the school safety committee, everyone that's on it, is that going to be public information for all of us to see, or are the teachers and staff aware of who's on this committee?
Yeah, I mean, it's a public committee. It's, I think our minutes go to the school committee meetings. They're all public documents, those types of things, unless there's anything we would need to redact, like, or not talk about in that session, would be something like, you know, there's different things you don't want, you know, you don't want people knowing your secondary evacuation points and that kind of stuff, because then that can end up, you know, setting up a different target. So there's a lot of little things like that, but yeah, that's a advisory committee with school committee members on it, and those minutes are provided to the school committee. So
Okay, because I've talked to some teachers and they're not aware of who's on the committee, and I know that some of them have had questions, and they don't know who to ask the questions to.
Well,
or talk to them.
every principal is on the committee.
Okay.
So they can always go to their principal if it's a
Okay.
teacher. And I do think that the safety committee was on a little bit of a, I think, a hiatus before we restored it this fall.
Okay. And then my comment is that I volunteer in the elementary school every week, and one thing that I've noticed, of course it's brought to my attention more so after Florida, but it seems as though the office doesn't really notice who's coming directly into the office and going directly into the school. I don't know what can be done about that. I mean, it's, you know, fine lines of who's going to monitor the office, who's going to monitor the doors. I know that the camera system was installed and that you'll probably be looking at those, but how often? But it's just, it's very, it's easy to get by the office unnoticed, which is a concern. I've heard that some parents have been able to get through the office and go directly into a classroom without being escorted into the classroom and all that. So what sorts of things are going to change about that?
Yeah, I think we would just have to, you know, work with our staff that are buzzing our people into the building to make sure that we have that follow through, and that they know the protocol of what happens if someone does not stop to sign in or do whatever that, you know. And I think just making sure that we clarify that. So that's that's an easy thing we can do tomorrow, is pretty much check in with our office staff and say, what are we doing? Do we know who to call? That kind of stuff. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that the show's over? All right. All right, well, I advertised this thing from 7 to 8. I guess it was my own fault for talking too long, huh? Listen, I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I want to thank all our panelists up here. You guys did a great job. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate you coming out tonight. Our principals and other administrator or assistant principal back there are here. our staff members and parents. I think it was nice to, I said it probably to 10 different people today. I had no idea what kind of turnout we were going to get tonight, right? I didn't know if there was going to be, I literally did one of these once in another previous school district, and we had 3 people in the audience. So I think that says it's good that we had a fairly decent turnout here. Maybe a couple weeks ago we might have had more, but I think right now it's good that we're still keeping this conversation going and taking steps to try to protect our children and try to make sure we're moving forward.
Just one more thing
Yeah.
before we go. I think, and thanks to you guys, and thanks to everyone here that showed up. It's nice to see a community that's willing to listen and people show up to care. But I think that what I hear from a lot of people and what I think would be nice is it'd be good to see action, right? Because action is better than no action. So
Yep.
if the kids can't know the Alice protocol before next year, maybe they know the A, the L, and the I by
Yeah.
April, right? So they know something. It's better to know if the perfect plan is going to take a year to make.
Yep.
Well, we shouldn't be waiting a year to inform the kids on what they should be doing. If these teachers were trained and they were trained to be trainers, they
Yeah.
could visit a classroom a day for the
Yeah.
next 4 weeks, and the kids could all have at least a brief on what they should do in one of these situations. So just action,
Yep.
and then to tie that action to, you spoke a lot about communication, and I
Yeah.
agree, us communicating with you, but also you communicating with us on what is happening and where do we get our information, the disparate sources, but how do we know what is going on and how we can take part in talking to our children and talking to the teachers, but how do we know? How do we know what's going on, how they're being trained, and where we might be able to play a role in helping you guys get them
Yep.
trained?
No, so that's a good point, because if we are training our staff with some different procedures and then we're passing that on to the students, it goes back to that having a conversation with your kid. We need to communicate that to you so that you guys can reinforce that at home and try to reinforce it so it is more of that sense of it's not, we're not practicing this because you're always in danger. We're practicing this because we want you to know what to do if it were to happen. So I think that's a good point, and I do think that is our plan is to take action. Like, I'm hoping we have Alice fully implemented by next year, but I'm hoping that the goal is that the timeline we have based on our last admin meeting, like I said, is we're going to revise that. We're going to review the Code Blue procedures, try to implement the A's, whatever it is, whatever we can implement now. We're going to use our faculty meetings, which are typically the first Tuesday of the month, which will be like I think it's April 3rd or something like that, to train our staff, and then we'll have the staff talk to the students about the protocol and run a drill. Maybe not April 4th, but shortly after that. So, but I think before April vacation, you'll see that we'll have revised our protocol, trained our staff, and run through with the students, and then we'll communicate that to the parents. So when I do the Connect Eds now, I try to do the phone call. I also try to do the text message. We also have the ability to do the email. I know I tried to email out this flyer for this event. I can always try to email out some other documents, and we can try to reference them and we'll put them on our website too, so people can see what it is that we're teaching the students about how to respond in these situations.
Yeah, that sounds great, thanks. And I have one more just clarification from
Yeah.
the police officers. So if I understand right, there's one school resource officer, and he's part-time doing
Yes.
that job and spread over the 3 schools,
Yes,
right?
yep.
That's not accurate, right?
No.
And you had a great idea of having police officers stop by the school, having lunch, playing basketball, doing some kind of thing. What would it take for us to support you to get that done? To have more police presence as a friendly community police presence, not a lockdown M16.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
how do we get that done? You tell us, how can we help you?
We can do that tomorrow. I'd have to talk with Mr. Hastings and the principals of the school and see if, they're welcome. I don't know if they're going to like the lunch, but we can free them up, the officers up to do that, especially at this time of the year when there's not many officers on vacation. So we'll have staffing to go up and send different officers up at different times so they get to meet some of the kids. And I have to talk to the principals to see if they think it's a good idea having the police at the school. The town has always been good in the past. I don't think it's anything that there'd be too much opposition to. Some towns probably wouldn't like it, but others.
I think it's been, in the other districts I've worked in, I think it's been great, because I think, like you said, that building those connections, like you mentioned, those like previous programs, having the SRO being around, eating lunch with kids, and being someone that's there that you can count on, there all the time at arrival and dismissal, those types of things, and just being someone, to become someone that the kids can trust and confide in and do those types of things. So, I think it's definitely something that we'll continue having our conversations about it, and especially as we...
We're up here for different things anyways. Mr. O'Malley has the criminal justice program. There's officers up here speaking in the criminal justice program. I come up once in a while and talk. They have me over to the middle school once in a while. Talk. And we do ride-alongs. The kids in the program, the officers come up with the cruisers. They hop in the cruiser. They ride around with them a couple hours. So we try to stay involved up here as much as possible. Yeah.
We got one more.
I'm curious, Brian and Chief, how deep and how often is training for these types of situations, right? You mentioned, Brian, Florida, how cops, the officers on campus, 3,000 students, pros, right? That type of training, in my mind, seems very military-like, not even when turning into the military, but how often, to me, it seems like that kind of training needs to be done on a regular basis so you're ready for that situation. How often, how deep is that training?
We do our regular firearms training. We do qualification. We do that twice a year with the rifle and the firearm. And we try to incorporate different drills in that at that time too. We've been doing the active shooter training once a year with the officers on the shift. I've also sent the day shift officer. We have an emphasis on that. We've sent them to training out in Springfield with a organization that puts on this extreme active shooter training. That's a 4-day course that they've been to. So once a year for the regular patrol staff, we do it. And the instructors go to training constantly. The school resource officer goes to different juvenile. There's an organization that he belongs to, and he goes to different training throughout the year. So there's specific officers that go to more specialized training. The regular patrol officers do their qualification training, firearms training twice a year, plus they do the active training once a year. So at least 3 times a year we're training in different situations with our firearms and in different situations. The school thing, the active killer response is once a year with the regular patrol officers. But the guys, what's that? I'm sorry. Probably budgetary. The cost when we do the training, the officers are on overtime. The availability of the schools, like I said, we try to do it during the school break, and probably it just comes down mostly to the cost of it. The equipment doesn't cost much because it's airsoft. We own that, and there's a couple BBs that we need to clean up. We try to keep that in a secure area. We have talked about expanding on it. We recently met. We had a meeting with the hospital, and we have a plan in place. We worked the sergeant who's in charge of the firearms at the station, the training. He worked with them to develop a policy for their active shooter. So it's not just a situation where he recently has spoken to some church members, some pastors from some local churches in the community. It's a situation that needs to be addressed in the religious community, the business community, and the hospital that are soft targets as well, and that an incident could happen. So we've expanded the training and used it to help develop the policy at the hospital, to help churches, and I've talked to like I said, we took him off 2 patrol shifts a week to put him on just firearms, and part of that is, and I just talked to him recently about reaching out to churches that haven't reached out, and make yourself available and make yourself known to businesses. We've talked to Weetabix at one time, a year and a half or so ago, about the same thing when they have issues. I think we've talked to Nipro in the past. We haven't gone through the developing a policy with them, but we've talked about situations more with them when they fire somebody. They're interested in having us down there, and we've talked to them about having a plan with that disgruntled employee type of thing. So we have expanded it not just in the schools, but I think basically it comes down to money. It comes down to the finances of doing it, paying overtime for 28 guys to train more than once a year with it. We try to keep to provide the resources and the time for people to, and officers should take it upon themselves to keep themselves trained and qualified and proficient in any piece of equipment that we carry. So that's not to say that it's formal training, but officers and many of them do take it upon themselves to. And I watch videos. Belong to certain organizations, and I get magazines, and that's up to officers too to read what the best practices and what's gone wrong in certain situations like Florida, what's gone right. And some of that is informal. And to say what the chief did, a lot of things, and you have a great point, we need to expand the school resource officer. But a lot of things we do are informal, and we are here, and we are doing this, and we are doing that, and we do need better communicate that things are being done. And to speak to the point of communication, a lot of questions were about that. I found out as a lieutenant dealing with the media, and Jan is great at the item. I have a great relationship with her. There's a lot of misinformation. Facebook is full of misinformation. When I get a call about an incident that happened in town, the story is nothing like what really happened in town. So getting the right information out there is very, very important, because there's going to be information out there whether you put it out or not. So it's upon us to put out the right information so that the wrong information isn't out there.
This firearms training, I just want you to be aware that it's rare that the police ever stop these shootings. It's a quick event, and it's usually somebody at the scene that stops it. You know, I read a whole study on 80 different shootings, and I'm going to say the police stopped a very small percentage of them. It's people taking things into their own hand at the scene and putting a stop to them, or for some reason the guy just stops shooting, decides enough, and generally they take their own life. But it's you know, but we're prepared in case we get here and it's still going on. And in Clinton, where it's a small town area-wise, there's a good chance that we could get here very rapidly and might have to confront the guy. And like Brian said earlier, when the gentleman is, or the person is confronted, they usually, it's a suicide mission. Yeah. On 80% of them, it's a suicide mission, and they usually, as soon as they hear the police are coming, boom, they end it right there.
We've been searching on the state level for a few years to find a revenue stream for local police for their training. Right now, it's a different allocation every year depending on how tight the state budget is to be able to give the Municipal Police Training Council training funds to allow this in-service training to enhance, because as we know, our local departments are spread thin. We just had a meeting with the Central Mass Chiefs of Police yesterday, and this was one of the primary questions that was discussed. So, just so you know, fire training, the Fire Academy over in Stowe, and all of the fire training throughout the Commonwealth is paid for by a 0.25% surcharge on your homeowner's insurance. You may not even know that, but that's why there's a consistent revenue stream for fire training. There is no similar revenue stream for continuous municipal police training. The state police obviously are funded through the state budget, but we just haven't, because of the fiscal and financial situation and no desire for new taxes. I mean, there's been proposals to put a surtax on people's auto insurance. There's a current proposal to put a surtax on rent-a-cars. And that may have a few more legs this year. We're going to examine it. But then, you're going to have people like the insurance industry opposing that, because many rent-a-cars are paid for by people whose, your car's broken down or in the shop, or you're in an accident, and it's the insurance industry paying for it. So we're constantly trying to find a similar revenue stream so that the chief and Brian don't have to go, scrambling, to the selectmen and the finance committee every year saying, boy, we could use some more money for this training, for the firearm training or the school safety training, or training on rapid response to situations like this. There is on the school safety funds, there is in the Governor Baker's proposed budget, there is a grant program that I think you'll see carried into the House version of the budget for the next fiscal year to allow school departments to step up for grants for enhancing the safety of their schools. And obviously with the events of the past month, I think the likelihood for success of that surviving the budget process is probably pretty high.
All right. Thank you again for coming out. I appreciate your support. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you to everyone up here again.
Thank you.